everybody.
All right.
How are you? It's a good-looking crowd.
It is. It is.
So if you are at the Creating Purpose Driven by Design talk, you're in the right spot.
Yes, that's where we are.
So I'm AJ Hassan. I work at RGA Chicago. I'm the Executive Creative Director of the Stories practice there. Super excited to be here today with you guys talking about purpose-driven designs. It's a personal passion of mine. A lot of the work of my career has been at working to find opportunities for brands to create more purpose-driven work where they're able to take their brand beliefs and create work at the intersection of their audience's beliefs. And so we're really excited here today to talk about some really great cases that we're seeing across the industry, as well as some really neat work we're doing together.
Cool. And I'm Todd Kaplan. I'm currently the VP of Marketing at PepsiCo. I've been at PepsiCo for about 11 years now, held a variety of different roles, from sports marketing to Mountain Dew to some innovation and insights roles. And right now, for the last 2 years or so, I've headed up our water portfolio. For those who don't know, we have a variety of brands in our water portfolio, our biggest being Aquafina. And we've recently launched a couple new brands, most recently a few weeks ago, Bubbly, which is our new sparkling water brand, and about a year ago, LIFEWTR, our premium water brand that we're going to talk to you a little bit about today. And this is my first time here at South by Southwest. Also, like AJ, super passionate about purpose-driven brands, and just we're excited to kick it off. So with that, why don't we hop into it. So we're going to take you through a variety of different things today and keep this kind of informal, more conversation-like. And first, we're going to start with just kind of really being clear about what is a purpose-driven brand. There's a lot of misnomers about what it is, what it isn't, so we're just going to have a very clear definition of what that is. Talk about why it matters today in the cultural landscape today for brands to be considering, purpose-driven marketing. And then about walking the walk, how literally when you're purpose-driven, you have to flow it through everything that you do. And then we're going to get into a bit of a case study, as I mentioned, about LIFEWTR. So with that.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, and I think that the interest here is nice to see, because I think we are seeing a lot of incredible work being done in the industry across the landscape, and really memorable, effective work by brands where they're starting to infuse purpose into everything they do. And that's what we really mean when we talk about a purpose-driven brand. But as Todd said, there really are different ways that brands can do good in the world, where they can express purpose or a cause or be part of a cultural moment. And so we just kind of want to pull that apart a little bit for you and kind of talk a little bit about the differences of those.
Yeah, because I think one of the things when people think about the notion of something purpose-driven, a lot of people go immediately to cause-driven marketing, or a cultural moment, something where there's a moment that needs a brand to make a statement. But it's a big distinction from being purpose-driven, right? Having a nice CSR program doesn't make you a purpose-driven brand. Responding to a real actual moment in time doesn't make you a purpose-driven brand. What it is about this notion of it's core to your values, and every day it guides everything that your brand is doing, which we're going to talk about. So AJ will give a couple examples of how to tease this apart, just to make sure we're all on the same page with what we're talking.
Yeah, so those are really the kind of the three things that we're going to tease apart. And again, the first one really, I think a lot of is, you said, a lot of misnomers around cause marketing. Amazing work being done out there related to causes, where brands are really stepping up and making a statement, whether in culture or helping people in need, where there is a moment in time where they can actually, because of the resources, because of what they have, they can actually meet someone's need. And those are incredible cases. And so I think a good example of this, I don't know if anybody saw this work last year, it won the Grand Prix Lion over at Cannes for Data Lions. A beautiful piece of work by Whirlpool. They had this amazing insight that they discovered around students not attending schools, especially in underprivileged areas, where the attendance rates were falling because they didn't have clean clothes. I mean, teachers were taking the clothes home and washing them for the kids so that they would actually come and attend school. So Whirlpool found out about this. They tested this out in a couple of schools, and they had an incredible attendance rate increase after that. I think it's a 90% increase in attendance from just putting washers and dryers in schools, in these test schools. And now, again, they're really living that through, and I think they're actually extending the program with Teachers of America. So it's pretty inspiring.
Yeah, but again, not purpose-driven.
Right, it's more specifically, again, this is, I would say, what we would call like really a brand that wasn't built on purpose. Like, their purpose isn't about elevating kids in school to make sure they get an education, right? I mean, they saw an opportunity where they could meet a need. So it's really where they stepped in for a cause. So.
Yeah.
And I'd say the second piece, again, we see a lot of this right now with regard to culture. There are a lot of brands who are starting to jump into cultural conversations. An issue-based story where maybe they can take a position on something. I mean, sometimes it's politics, sometimes it's a cultural debate. And this is something that allows brands to, again, based on whatever their belief system is or whatever their product might be, allows them to sort of get in these conversations, make their brands more relevant, and make these meaningful connections to engage in a conversation that their audiences care about. I think a great example of this that we've seen, the ravenous hurricane season that we just saw last year, Budweiser stopped producing their beer cans and started bottling water to help these hurricane hit areas. And again, a great cultural moment in time where they could step up and meet a need, but they're not, they're not a purpose-driven brand that's like kind of pulling this through everything they do. But it is something that, again, they were able to be relevant in that particular moment in that conversation because of their resources.
Yep.
And then again, sort of like what we're really going to focus on today is about the core, right? So this is what we call essentially more than a moment in time. So instead of a brand sort of pushing into a moment where there's a cause or meeting a need, or there's a cultural opportunity where they can jump into a debate or make a statement. Brands that live their purpose through and through 365 days a year and are literally built on that from a belief system is really what we talk about when we mean purpose-driven brands.
Yeah, and I think the key is if you're a purpose-driven brand, it's something that is so embedded in your DNA that you have no choice but to own it 365 days a year. Every time your brand behaves, you think, you act, that purpose is at the forefront of everything you do. And it basically, the way to start thinking about it is a purpose-driven brand really asks the question of why does my brand exist? And that's not necessarily why does my brand exist, to make profit or to make revenue for my company, or where does it exist in the category relative to the competition. It's where does it exist in the world, in society, right? And if you ask the question of what would the world look like if your brand was not a part of this world? What is the actual service to kind of society that your brand actually provides to the end user? And these purpose-driven brands are created with a DNA that's really designed to do more than it is to sell.
That's right. And so, I mean, it's really, like Todd said, they're really looking to do so much more than just sell something. And that's actually part of what differentiates them. And it holds them to their beliefs and how they act and talk and walk in the world every single day. And so some of those key drivers that we see consistently across purpose-driven brands and kind of baked into their DNA is they really look to impact society and culture. First of all, they live by their core beliefs. As we said, this isn't a moment in time. This is a day-to-day commitment to whatever that purpose may be. And they're truly looking to build relevancy and create meaningful connections with their audiences. And so that's everything from how they design their product to the proposition to the way they communicate in market about those beliefs. And I think a great example that we're really excited to share, and again, it's one of those, I think we all probably have these products in our homes, or at least most of us, is the Method brand. I mean, it's a really interesting brand that, a number of years ago really kind of upended the household cleaning product industry. A pretty kind of low interest category, not a lot of excitement going on with dishwasher detergent and things like that, hand soaps. But they saw a real opportunity to sort of make sustainability stylish. There's a lot of trending and a lot of audiences caring more about being sustainable, doing things that are right for the environment. But there's also those everyday needs of like just keeping your hands clean, keeping your dishes clean. And so it was a really interesting way for them to think about kind of bringing these two things together where you had products that didn't have to hide under your sink anymore.
Yeah, and just to add to that, it's not limited to just brands that are all about sustainability or saving the whales or doing something very, lofty and good. At the same time, being purpose-driven is really, like we said, having that clear focus of the end user. And Clorox, in a similar category, Clorox historically has a very functional-driven product, very superior product in terms of, getting rid of germs and all of that kind of stuff. And historically, their success of kind of what they do is say, oh, well, we eliminate germs, we clean dirt. But the real purpose, when you ask the question of why does this brand exist, well, you don't clean dirt just for the sake of cleaning it. You clean dirt, ... so something else can happen afterwards, right, with a clean floor, with a clean sink, with a clean whatever you're cleaning. And so they recently launched this new campaign with this reframe of clean is the beginning, right? Clean used to be the result you would get from using a Clorox product, and now the idea of clean is the beginning, because what comes next is everything. And they had these beautiful little 15-second spots where they show a guy, cleaning a sink that's a dirty sink so that they can, bathe their newborn in it, or somebody cleaning their car seat so that he can have his prom date and have this great moment with it. And so it really elevates the level of the brand into a much more emotional space, a much more relevant space with society. And that's kind of the power of reframing, from function all the way up through a core purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting too, because what we're seeing is, like Method's an example of a brand that was like literally built on purpose, right? Mm-hmm. Like from their DNA, that's how they differentiated themselves. Clorox sort of evolved their purpose, and that's right. A brand that's been around. So we're seeing a lot of that. We're seeing brands who might be sitting on something really interesting, re-looking at themselves, and as Todd said, reframing that in ways that are more meaningful. Yeah,
and it's something that, I know all of you out here have different agencies, different brands, different ways you connect. It's a good question to start asking, like, why does your brand exist? What's the real role, it plays in society? So with that, why don't we get into kind of why purpose brands matter, if that makes sense. So for starters, it's the right thing to do. Today, in today's connected society and culture, the role of brands need to really think about the impact they have in society and culture. They don't just play within their category. People look to brands to behave in certain ways as culture happens. And that as, like I said, brands have the power to impact and change culture, especially when there's a need and a vacancy. So think of kind of really understanding this notion of purpose as a way of, think of it as like self-awareness for your brand, right? So when a crisis happens, something in culture happens, you'll know how to respond because you already know your set of values as a brand, as opposed to what you see for brands that aren't as purpose-driven. Sometimes it's just, the perspective of the CEO or a leader or somebody taking a stand on something. It'll become much, much more clear. And I think a really great example of that we're going to talk through is with the recent work that's happened with Dick's Sporting Goods.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah, I think Dick's Sporting Goods is a really interesting brand.
Yeah.
Give it to them.
Yeah, give it up for Dick's, yeah.
We've seen a lot of really interesting brands step up lately. And again, I think this goes to that idea of there's a vacancy in culture, but Dick's is interesting because they're a brand that's been around a long time and they have values. They have values that are about kind of bringing people together through sport. And I think a great piece we would love to share with you is actually we saw this during the Olympics, and it's a nice preamble to even what we saw happen after that.
Yeah, so let's take a look.
There's a lot of anger out there. You have no facts whatsoever. I'm not ignoring the fact. And it's ripping us apart.
You know what? That is a pathetic argument.
But we have something unbreakable binding us together. You can find it here every weekend. Or here on Tuesday nights. In 1936, it stood up to a tyrant. And in 73, it battled for equality. So join Team USA over these 17 days as the world puts differences aside to play games. And you'll see humanity at its best. This is sport. And it will help unite us as one country, one people, and one world.
So I think what's interesting about when you look at the Olympic work, it was a small moment in time right before everything, all the events that happened in Parkland. And I think what that did is when you look at that spot, it really reinforces and crystallizes the values as to why they reacted the way they did. They're a brand that stands for making sport accessible, a brand that brings people and families together, and they're a brand that does sell guns for sport. And that's fine. But what's interesting about what happened with Parkland is they said, we shouldn't be selling AR rifles because we don't, AR rifles is not about sport. That's about hurting people. And we don't want those in schools. And so it's a really noble and powerful thing when a brand steps up in that moment, especially, given the fact that, we've had a lot of kind of gridlock in our government to be able to deal with this issue. And so it's been very inspiring to see brands like this stand up. And I think, again, what's also, I think, good to know and sort of, I think, relevant to point out with regard to Dick's is not only was it part of their value system and what they believe in, and obviously selling guns, having a right to do this and be part of that conversation, this was not new for them. After Sandy Hook, they actually stopped selling AR rifles in all of their stores. They left, I think, some of them in Field and Stream, and so they actually continued this statement after Parkland by removing them all from Field and Stream, as well as getting rid of the ammo memo and the supporting products as well that were supporting that. So it's, they really continued a behavior that they'd actually had started, so it wasn't a flash in the pan.
Yeah, and it also just stems from the fact that, again, their purpose is really to unite people through sport, and when they see something that's actually dividing people and actually not used for those purposes, that made it much clearer for how to react no matter where you are on the spectrum.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about why these things matter and why purpose-driven matters, there's a number of different things. And beyond brands expressing their nobility or being able to step up in these cultural moments where we have a vacancy, where we need brands who have those resources and those voices to do that, there's also just the reality of the landscape that we live in. I mean, the phone in your hand is a huge reason why brands should be expressing more purpose. It helps really differentiate them, because what we know now that's different than the Madison Avenue of old age, is that captivating people is no longer a passive experience. You're not just sitting in front of a television and consuming a brand. You're participating in a brand, and people want to participate in a brand. They want to engage in a brand. And so the rising digital and social landscape has really created a space where consumers are no longer passive viewers, they're active ambassadors and advocates for your brand potentially. And this is essentially the principles I think that we see is that playing out with the rise of social and digital is that the truth is people pay attention to culture, not advertising. People share stories that they want to say. This is about finding those meaningful connections, those intersections where your brand meets the beliefs of the audience that is part of your brand. People pay attention to stories that their friends share. They don't want to be sold. They don't want to be pushed by a brand. They actually want to love brands. I actually say this to brands, and I say this to audiences. People love their brands. They want to love and be loyal to brands. They just want the brands to care about them too. They just want brands to sort of be saying something meaningful. People love that badge value. People love to throw on a Nike shirt and show the swoosh. I mean, so it's when a brand builds that connection with their audiences is where it's the exponential love is huge.
Yep.
I mean, I think the other thing is obviously, and probably many of you in this audience, right? Millennials. I mean, this is the new every brand audience that every brand wants. So from a business perspective, the reality is that this set of beliefs is especially evident in millennials. They're jaded by the push advertising of old. They don't want a sales pitch. They're looking to connect with brands in more relevant ways. And we actually know for a fact that 80% of millennials are what we call belief-driven buyers. And so, they are really looking for more from a brand than just the actual product.
Yeah, and when you think about this, millennials are these belief-driven buyers, largely because, a few kind of key themes that you see across, millennials as a whole, right? So one is this value of transparency. I think it plays into, AJ, what you talked about everyone's so connected, digital access, everything, you can sniff out BS in a heartbeat.
That's right.
Right? And so you want brands that are upfront, tell you what's happening, or, basically open it up to everybody, because that's a really critical core value for millennials. Secondly is, as a cohort, millennials are very optimistic and want to change the world and believe they can, right? And so when they see brands that actually are taking a stand, want to impact society, want to impact culture, that also is something that resonates. And then lastly, I think, as AJ mentioned, they want to participate and engage with brands. So this isn't something where, brands are just some little business thing. Brands are, fully multi-dimensional beings in the world nowadays, with digital Twitter accounts and everything interacting back and forth as you look at this, and they want to participate and be a part of, all the change and everything that happens. And then I think the last thing is that, if for no other reason than to get behind purpose-driven brands, like it's good business. Right now, millennials, I just saw an article the other day that millennials are going to pass boomers in purchasing power. Right? And so as you look at, the role that millennials play, if your brand does not resonate with this audience, don't play in those core values and core themes, you're a brand of yesterday, and you're already kind of outdated, upon your first interaction.
That's right, yeah. So, I mean, it's just, like I said, relevancy is key, I mean, I think all brands, and again, that's the interesting thing about like the Clorox we talked about, is you don't have to be a startup to have a purpose, right? Any brand could be sitting on something that is what their brand is about and has always been about, but they just might not really have looked at it the right way. So there's always that opportunity for brands to be thinking about how can I best, put myself out in the world in ways that are relevant. Yeah. And so part of that, and we talk a little bit about, how do we really be effective, right? Like we see a lot of brands wading into this space, right? And sort of cause marketing, the cultural moments. And it is important that the way that they do that is authentic and that they're walking the walk in ways that aren't undermining their intentions. There are a lot of brands who have good intentions, but we've seen some missteps here and there. And so it's important to talk a little bit about what does that mean. And so, you know, we call it the be it, do it, and say it. And so what we essentially mean by that is that good intentions really aren't enough. The best brands succeed because they be it, do it, and say it. And so when we mean by be it is that, you know, they've actually earned the right to own the conversation. So, and that's sort of what I was referencing with Dick's, right? Like they actually exhibited that behavior with the Sandy Hook. They took that stand a number of years ago already, but they also, again, they were grounded in this belief of bringing families together through sport. And so, again, as Todd said, when these moments happen, it allows brands to look inside themselves and say, well, how would I react in this moment? How should I? Is there something I can do to be part of this conversation and make a difference? Do it, you know. So I think the other thing we've talked a lot about is the say and the do, and we talk a lot about this at RGA. It's important to not just say, as a brand, what you mean or what you intend or what's important to you, but that you actually back it up with action. You know, brands have resources. Brands have the ability to not just be a megaphone, they have the ability to actually help affect something. So like when you look at Budweiser, who, you know, stopped production on beer, they had the resources in their plants to send cans of water. And so that was just an example of something that they could really, from a resource standpoint, do it. So they, you know, that was an example of a kind of a do it. So you really have to be able to back it up with action, not just kind of say it. And then the last thing is the say. I mean, you know, you can share what you believe, and it is important as a brand to take a stand, to share what you believe, but it wouldn't have meant as much for Dick's to sort of say what they believed if they didn't sell guns, or if they didn't have this belief system around bringing families together versus pulling people apart. So all of those pieces together are what makes it authentic for a brand to be part of these conversations. So you really have to gut check around all of these things, and that adds up really to the main thing, which is authenticity. And if you be it, do it, and say it, you know, and you do it from a place of truth, then you're golden. If you are in a situation where you have something you want to say, and maybe you can even do the resources, but you don't actually have the right to the conversation, or you actually might have some issues in your own organization that are contradictory to the issue or the moment or the stance that you want to take, that could come back on you, and that's a watch out. You got to be careful of that. So you know, authenticity is key, because if it's forced, it'll fail eventually. So
absolutely.
And I think, you know, Fearless Girl is one of the most, I think, inspiring, beautiful pieces of work that we saw in 2017. And I think it was absolutely beautiful. It was a really powerful, simple statement. It traveled the world, and it still stands as an incredibly empowering statement for women today. And I think they've made it permanent, which is really incredible. But I think this is an example of, again, within a few months, you know, here's a brand that said it. They wanted to make a statement. They went out and they did it, right? They put the girl right in front of the bowl. But when they dug underneath the covers, right, for all the power this had, they got tangled up a little bit in the backlash of actually the fact that, you know, their firm had opposed 12 times, I think over 12 times, gender equality and equal pay for women. So, you know, that's when it's like you really have to, if you're going to do these things where you're going to wade into culture and be part of them and make these really, again, beautiful, powerful statements, you've got to just make sure you have a right to it.
Yep.
So another piece that I think, if we talk about the be it, do it, say it, and this is personally close to my heart, is the Like a Girl work that we did for Always. You guys may have seen some of this work. And again, I'm proud of the fact that I think that we had the right to, you know, all the right elements in terms of authenticity. And we worked really hard to make sure that we had the right elements of authenticity, of the kind of the be it, do it, and say it elements that I think are key. So, for example, you know, when we talk about Like a Girl, I think a lot of times people think, wow, that brand came out of nowhere. But truthfully, their brand purpose for over 30 years was to support women's confidence. It was just that for a long time, they had been sort of talking about it in a more functional way. But they had also been doing, so they had been kind of being it, right? Because it was in their purpose to support women's confidence, and they had been doing it, like they were doing programs in Africa, like partnerships with UNESCO, where they were helping girls who who couldn't go to school get access to feminine products so that they could attend school. So they had a really incredible wealth of good works that they were doing around supporting women's confidence through causes, through these good works, but they weren't really talking about it. They weren't really talking about confidence in a way that went beyond the product. And so Like a Girl came about because they had this really interesting intersection of, you know, here they were, this brand that was the leader in the category, and they were trying to connect with this younger audience, you know, find that meaningful connection. And I think young girls in particular, they're not in front of a television. It wasn't the way that they were being marketed to. But they're also really important because that's the age during puberty when they're actually entering the category and they need these products. And so what they found, because they do a ton of research, is that they actually knew for a fact that these girls were going through a confidence crisis, that during puberty, girls' confidence drops twice as much as a boys', which is just absolutely incredible. And it's shocking. And so, you know, one of our clients, and again, this is a testament to great clients who actually can see beyond the product, came to us and said, essentially, we want to change that. We want to change that one girl at a time, which was essentially the heart of the brief that we got. And so it was about how can we actually create a piece of communication that delivers on confidence and not, which is what the product is about, but not necessarily about like showing me a pad with liquid being poured on it, right? So to convince these girls. So what it is, it was looking to find that meaningful connection and champion women's confidence in a really meaningful way for this audience. So I'll
want to take a look?
Take a look.
Hi, Aaron. Show me what it looks like to run like a girl.
My hair.
Show me what it looks like to fight like a girl. Now throw like a girl.
Aw.
So do you think you just insulted your sister?
No. I mean, yeah, insulted girls, but not my sister.
My name is Dakota, and I'm 10 years old.
Show me what it looks like to run like a girl. Throw like a girl. Fight like a girl. What does it mean to you when I say run like a girl?
It means run fast as you can.
All right.
So,
yeah, I mean, I think just on that one, it's worth noting a couple of things, which is that was actually the 60. We didn't think we could do a 60. It was a 3.5-minute film that went viral over the summer first. Believe it or not, we found out we got asked to do it as a Super Bowl spot, and we all were terrified because we're like, how do we tell the story in a 60-second spot? But we did. We found the heart of the story. But I think what's interesting, again, when we talk about the be it, do it, say it for always, is that, as Todd had said, we talked about this earlier, you know, it was a brand that, you know, historical brand, kind of like a Clorox, that had been, you know, basically being it, supporting women's confidence. They were actually doing it out in the market. But all they were talking about was blue goo and water on pads, let's be honest. Not something that most people really want to watch. So not that it's not important, it's important. Functional, like, you know, having really good functional protection is really important. But what I think they learned from this is that it is more important to actually say it, to communicate, and that when you communicate what your brand stands for, there's a powerful connection you can make with audiences. And they have followed up on this with other communications around championing girls who lose their confidence during sports, for example. And so they have begun to try to find ways to include more of the say in to express their purpose.
Yep. So I think, again, a lot of great examples really talking about the framework that we talked through. And I think what we're going to now shift to is talk about a real-life example that we've been working through this past year in LIFEWTR, in terms of how we built a brand with purpose. But just to kind of recap, so we now know what a purpose-driven brand is, right, and what it isn't. We know why purpose-driven brands matter, and we know that walking the walk is critical, as AJ just said. So again, over the last year, we've really spent a lot of time building and bringing to life through all those kind of facets this new-to-world brand, LIFEWTR. And I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with it, but I'll give you guys a bit of a kind of context before we get into kind of that journey and how we've built a brand with purpose from the ground up. So just to give some context to the water landscape, right? Some business context. You know, water is a really, really interesting category to play in as a marketer because it's a bit of an anomaly, right? On one hand, you have this limitless opportunity. Every single human being on earth drinks water. There's not a lot of other categories that could say anybody with a mouth is a potential consumer, right? Doesn't matter your age, your gender, your geography, your socioeconomic status, like, sounds like a great business opportunity, right? Sounds like, you know, and just so you know, it's a big business. Bottled water specifically, it has 90% household penetration. So 90% of homes have water. That means more homes have water than soap, than shampoo, and then tissues. So I don't know what those other homes are all about, but it is something it's a big business. It's a $16 billion business in measured sales, probably double that if you go outside measured sales, and it's growing, right? So wow, what an opportunity. On the flip side, the category operates a little bit like a commodity at times because it's really hard to differentiate your product. It's water, you know, and so what you see a lot of times is people compete on price. Price drives a lot of this stuff. The brands are largely very functional, trying to differentiate, say, my brand is filtered this way, or it comes from this spring over here, and it's very functional how people talk about the purity and all that. And when you go into a cooler at a 7-Eleven, at a normal store, you typically see something like this. A lot of stuff that just looks the same. Blues, clears, functions, little mountains, and it's all kind of clustered together. And so consumers really just look to price as a way to tease it apart, and they shop on value and convenience, right? And because of that, you see a lot of switching. 80% of consumers bought multiple brands in the space in a given week, and there's really not a lot of brand loyalty, you know? And so, you know, pun intended, this functional marketing is watering down the category, right?
Way to go, Todd.
There you go, little water joke for you guys. How do you like that? Okay. So with that, ba-boom. All right. So as you look at it, you know, now this water category has expanded in recent years where new segments have emerged. So there's been this new segment around premium water, which is much more differentiated, where you see, you know, aside from the LIFEWTR sitting there in the bag, you see a lot of these brands that have typically nicer packaging, typically some sort of functional benefit, whether it's pH balance, they add electrolytes, things like that. Maybe a natural source story. It's, you know, shipped from some spring in some mountain around the world, and it's some wonderful, you know, proposition, you know, and it's one of the fastest growing businesses. It's a $2 billion segment, and it's growing 20%. So looking at all of this context as PepsiCo, where 2 years ago we just had, Aquafina does not play in this space right now. And this is a very attractive space to play in, but we want to play in it in the right way. And so as we looked at kind of the space and said, okay, well, let's try and better understand what are some of the drivers and motivators behind it, we really got into the occasion. And what we learned is that premium water drinkers typically drink that water throughout the day. When you look at it here, it's a 1 liter, it's a big thing. People have it in their bags, in their backpacks. You take it to class, you take it to work, and you sip it through that. You don't chug it all in one sitting. And because of that, you're drinking it around other people, right? So versus someone selling a toothpaste that happens in your own bathroom, everybody is seeing you, you know, drinking this. And so there is a little bit of this idea of it says something about you when you carry it, where you have it, what water you drink. It's a social cue. It's a little bit of a badge. And so as we started looking at this, saying, okay, the role of packaging is a really interesting proposition. And so obviously you need to have a great liquid inside and have the table stakes of, you know, the pH balance, all that, but the role of packaging, the role of emotion versus function. And then we started kind of peeling back this idea of badge value and how that could really play in the space. Then when we talked to consumers, what we learned is that, you know, 57% of bottled water drinkers believe that inspiration is essential to living a fulfilling life. And so when you think about this, these are people who are participating in this hugely functional category based on price, but they're striving for more connection to brands. As AJ talked about earlier, these people want to engage with brands. And specifically, as you look at millennials, which are the biggest cohort in premium water, 70% of millennials say that creativity is a top quality necessary for success. So there's this idea of creativity. And so you look at all these things together and say, okay, as PepsiCo, we want to build a brand in this space. We want to compete, but we don't want to just do a Me Too kind of, you know, we want to be competitive and do something a little bit differently. And so that's how we've built LIFEWTR, you know, which is an entirely different take on the water category. You got these bold, crisp, cutting visuals, you know, and every bottle of LIFEWTR has art by a real emerging artist on it. And we'll talk through how we built it with a brand purpose, with a core brand belief, and how an ecosystem around it that really brings it to life. So the LIFEWTR brand purpose, a lot of work went into kind of the words here, is to advance and showcase the sources of creation and creativity. And so the idea is that, you know, emerging artists can use the bottles as a canvas, and everything we do as a brand, and AJ can attest to this, we start every meeting with this, we end every meeting with it, we talk about it all the time. Every behavior, back to that 365 days a year, that core stuff we talked about earlier, always ladders up to this. And it's all anchored because of this core fundamental point of view we have on the world. Our core belief is that art ignites inspiration, and inspiration is as essential to life as water. And so that's how you get LIFEWTR, right? And so you think about this idea that, you know, we all know we need water to live, but art and the idea of how it inspires you, it pushes the world forward, it pushes your thinking, it inspires you, you know, through its creativity. We think, you know, while you couldn't live without water, we think life without inspiration or life without art also is not living, because you're not advancing, you're not pushing the world forward. So that's our unique perspective. And so when you look at all these things and how do we pull this to life through the actual brand behavior, you know, again, to advance and showcase the sources of creation and creativity. So showcase, every single bottle, like you see up here, has the work of emerging artists. We find emerging artists and are showcasing their work. We can't have our product without an emerging artist, so we can't not do that. And then the advance piece, we've built these 4 series throughout the year where we look for cultural anchors for areas that we want to kind of push the envelope and really push art forward and creativity forward, you know, and really advance the cause based on these cultural anchors. So you have these 4 series, you know, from public art to women in art, emerging fashion designers, and arts and education. We'll talk about a couple of these today and how we've then taken it through that spectrum as we get into the do and the say, not just the be. We've talked about the be right now, but as we get into the do and the say of this, of how we really bring all this to life. But
so, I mean, yeah, so, I mean, needless to say, when I got this assignment, I got the call to work on this, I was, you know, like, wow, this is exciting, right? Like a brand that actually is legitimately supporting artists and has purpose baked into everything down to their packaging. So communications, you know, often, you know, sometimes we're in a position in the marketing where you have brands who say they want to, you know, make a meaningful connection or they want to do something purposeful, but they don't have the goods to back it up. And so, you know, very powerful. And I think as a creative in particular, I found it really interesting because when you think about art, I really thought about this idea that, you know, so much of art has this feeling that it's exclusive and that it's sectioned off in urban centers or behind museum walls and that it's not accessible to people. And this idea of that inspiration is essential to life as water for everybody, that we all need inspiration in our day, whatever that might be. Everybody has a different piece of inspiration. You don't have to be an artist to appreciate inspiration or to, you know, sometimes you might just be flipping through Instagram and you're inspired by something you see and you get a rush. And so I think it's just such a powerful truth. And so I was really inspired by this idea of what the brand was actually doing was democratizing art. I mean, they're literally putting art on every single bottle in every corner of the country, in a 7-Eleven where you wouldn't normally find art, just by having it on a bottle. And so, you know, it was interesting, we had the opportunity to sort of break the story on the Super Bowl, which I think played into that tension. You know, you wouldn't expect an art brand to be in the most, you know, male-centric sports arena known to marketing, but I think that was the power of it, is saying, you know, art belongs to everyone, and you know, we brought it to the world that way. So that was our first foray, and we used that moment to really simply tell a beautiful story around how we are spreading more inspiration throughout the world, and the only piece of copy in the whole spot was art makes life more inspired. And that's really the brand belief, and that was beautiful. And so that was sort of the first foray into really establishing what our purpose was.
yeah, and so then after we put the brand out there in the world, then kind of the work got into, okay, so each of these series, as we shifted into series 2, which again was about women in the arts, we started mining for insights and really uncovered some really interesting stats. So what we learned was 51% of working visual artists today are women. Okay, nothing too surprising about that. About half the population, I guess a good kind of cross-section, makes sense. But then when you peel it back, only 5% of permanent collections in museums featured women artists. And that was staggering, because then you say, okay, let me get this straight. half of people who consider themselves artists are women, but when you go into a museum to look at their permanent work, 95% of the time you're looking at art by a man.
That's right.
And that we thought was just a really interesting tension as you think of just the broader societal tension right now around the subject, obviously, of the role of women and equality and everything we've been talking about, and specifically as a way for art. And so the way that, LIFEWTR is a brand that we thought, again, baked into our purpose. So step one is to showcase, and so that's the first behavior. So we have our 3 women artists. So you can see Lenny Z and Adrienne Gauthier and Trudy Benson, these 3 very talented women artists who designed the art for the Series 2 labels. But we didn't want to stop there. We wanted to make sure we would really advance and do something that really got into the do and the say piece of it, not just around the be. So
yeah, so I mean, I think what was really powerful about this is that, again, just thinking back to the larger idea that, struck me about the brand, that is this idea that we're bringing art out into the open for everyone. And yet what was interesting in the tension around this piece was that, the most underrepresented sector of artists are not being seen are women. And so we had a real opportunity here, as Todd said, to go beyond the bottles themselves, of showcasing them, and to really bring more women's art into the open and raise visibility of women artists. And so we created this idea called Open Gallery, in a conversation called Art by a Woman.
All right, so why don't we take a look?
To show more of women's art because it's just an honest representation of what the world is made up of.
I knew that women didn't have a wide representation in art collections. I was surprised that it was 5%.
Like, why not? I guess that's the question. Why not show more women artists? Everybody has a story. Women have a story. It's going to be a little bit different than a man's story, and it should be represented that way.
I think it's important when young girls go through a museum that they see not just a woman in a painting, but that they know that that painting was made by a woman and it's something they could do too.
I need to be more than 5% stronger, smarter, and beyond.
There's way more men in the arts world that's being represented than women, and we're about to change that.
So thank you guys. Yeah, I mean, we love that work, and I think what was in the execution, and you saw there, the first thing that we did, it was a multi-tiered approach. Again, what the idea of Open Gallery was essentially to raise the visibility of women artists, and we did that in a 3-pronged way. The first thing we did is we dropped a 60-foot wall in the middle of Lincoln Center. And we did a showcase, and we collaborated with a bunch of up-and-coming women artists, not just the artists on our bottles, but I think we had a group of about 10 or 12 other artists that participated in the show. And we brought people out to that to provoke the issue around all the art that isn't being seen. We filmed that piece of content, and we drove that to a larger conversation on social to help bring more visibility, to have women bring their art out into the open. And then we turned our Instagram into an open gallery. So we gave our handle over to women and we showed all of their art in our actual Instagram gallery. The other thing that we did is we turned our media spaces and outdoor. We went to high profile media spaces like Times Square, and we did an open gallery for women's art, as you saw in the film. We did Oculus, we did some work out in the Chicago Cubs. So we found these high profile spaces and we basically turned them into media galleries. So again, a really powerful piece of this CB and the see it, you know, the be it, do it, and say it. Sorry, I need more water. It's a long day. So anyway, but I think through and through, and that's what I'm most proud of working on this brand with Todd, is that they really do look at everything from the way that they've started the packaging all the way down to the communications of how do we make sure that we're telling stories in the most authentic way, that we are actually not just jumping into issues and trying to co-opt them, but we actually have a right to these conversations, and then we're actually helping do something about them, right? So again, I think that's a great model as a brand. If you're thinking about it, just make sure you're kind of checking those boxes. With regard to this piece, we saw a huge response on social. We had, you know, thousands and thousands of pieces of art being shared at the hashtag #ArtByWomen, which we then turned into our open gallery. So it was absolutely through the roof. I think we had 251 million impressions worldwide, almost 5 million views in like less than 3 weeks. So again, a piece of work that obviously resonated, but you know, was great in terms of also helping to really express to the world what the purpose of LIFEWTR was.
Yeah, and so we wanted to just kind of share that with you guys as an example of, again, how we pulled kind of from the core brand purpose, you know, all the way through to a creative execution, right, which was ultimately a do and a say. And just as you look at this for LIFEWTR, you know, it's actually working quite well. You know, LIFEWTR as a business, we just, you know, like I said, it's a little over a year old and it's already well over a $200 million brand. So we're very happy. It was the #1 innovation in all of beverages last year, and it's been really, really performing quite well. And as we're seeing our social channels grow, a lot of the participation, right, you know, you talk about this two-way engagement and dialogue with consumers. We're seeing, you know, you don't look at, when you look at kind of your social stuff, you look more at the engagement and kind of how passionate people are as opposed to just the total quantity. And we're like, people are very engaged. We've seen people putting, like, you know, the tattoos, kind of painting their faces with some of the artwork, actually really engaging with it at that next level and truly resonating. And so as we look at kind of, you know, our next step forward with this brand, you know, right now we're in the middle of Series 4, which again is arts and education. You can see these beautiful bottles up here. You know, we've partnered with 3 wonderful artists, again, who went to these great art programs because they weren't getting what they needed in their typical education that really helped change their life and really focus on that. And we think there's a really interesting area around this notion of arts and education, again, where it resonates today in culture. You know, and today, actually, you guys may not know, is actually Art Advocacy Day, where we're going to continue the conversation and importance around art, starting with education. So we're going to talk through a couple interesting stats and actually unveil a new film that's actually launching today on arts and education.
Yeah, it just happened to be, I mean, seriously, it was, I think,
serendipitous, yeah, it wasn't
we were on a
planned.
call and we were like, oh my God, we're launching the new film the day we're giving our
we
talk.
should probably talk about it.
So we should probably show that. So anyway, we're really excited about that, but it's a wonderful piece of work, and again, another one that's near to my heart because I do think that inspiration in art, it all starts with education. I mean, we all went to school, right? I mean, I think you don't have to, and I think you'll see in this story that, you know, art and how the impact that it has on us, even in education, it isn't about being an artist, that it makes us think differently. It makes us open our minds in different ways. And so I think what we found is, again, the insight here that you'll see that we really leaned into was this sort of staggering statistic around arts and education being defunded. Over the last 10 years, we've seen 80% of schools face these funding cuts that remove art from schools. Which is just kind of unbelievable. The other thing that I think as a consequence of that, which is super interesting, right, that we see, is that we also know for a fact that 84% of students rank high in creativity in kindergarten. But by the time they're in high school, I mean, we actually know that even in 10% in second grade, that drops to 10%, and then by high school, it's almost non-existent, which is just unbelievable. And so on the flip side of that, which I think is really maybe the most powerful story here, is that, You know, we think of art as a side activity, but the truth is that we know students who participate in art are more likely to be recognized, 4 times more likely to be recognized for academic achievement, which is incredibly powerful. I mean, who in this room doesn't want their kid to get a 4.0 or, you know, go to the best college, get a perfect SAT score? I mean, those are all the aspirations that we have for our kids. And what we know for a fact is that when you integrate art, whether you're studying math, whether you're studying science, whether you're studying engineering, when you have art integrated into that, you're 4 times more likely to achieve. And so it's really powerful.
And it's interesting, you know, I have 2 young kids at home, right? And all they do, you know, they're coloring, they're always bringing home art projects and all these little creations they made at school and all that kind of stuff. And I just, as you fast forward to them in high school thinking, okay, it's going to be sports practice and they're going to be prepping for the SAT and they're going to be doing all this other stuff. It's society has chosen, you know, to focus on these other areas that I think that we wanted to highlight this issue to really, again, advance you know, the role of art in education.
Yeah, and I want to take a minute here because we have a very special guest here in the audience. Lauren, are you out there? This is Lauren Greenfield, everybody. She is the amazing director of Like a Girl, who I partnered with.
Yep.
Emmy Award-winning director.
Yep.
She is also has a show here right now, Generation Wealth, an incredible documentary film that you must see. Actually, there's a show today at 2:45, but we partnered on not only Like a Girl together, but I wanted to call her out because she was an incredible collaborator with us in this particular film. So we did this new film, Arts and Education, with Lauren.
All right.
So we're going to show the film, and then I think afterwards we're going to take a few questions with her.
Afterwards, yep. So why don't we take a look at the film?
Science, social studies, history, math, science.
Math, science.
Math.
Science, technology, engineering, mathematics.
Science.
Math, you have to, like, study every day.
Didn't take art at all.
Art wasn't necessarily a huge focus.
The last time I had an art class was in 5th grade, which was 2 years ago.
What to do.
My name is Elijah. I'm kindergarten. I do art every day. I'm really good at art. I can paint pufferfish and cows. We do less art in 2nd grade than kindergarten.
I want to be a shoe designer, but art is a side activity.
At my old school, it was very much about getting you ready for standardized tests and doing your homework and fitting you in this box, and I fully fell into that.
So 2nd grade and 1st grade, you kind of need to get serious, and kindergarten, you can pretty much be like your own self.
I wish I got better, but it feels like as I've gotten older, my art skills have kind of gone back to a 2nd grade level.
My parents were both doctors, and having a career was everything. I just think that I'm innately an artist. That part of me wasn't nurtured. It's sort of like this, this lost treasure. To be on this planet and not fully give of myself and my talents and my gifts, I think that would be the saddest thing.
So I got to go to this school that fully integrates art into their curriculum and just values it in general. My improvement in art has made me better at almost all of my other subjects because I'm much more interested in them.
If I had done more art and focused more on that, I think I would have progressed so much more as a scientist. You can have the facts as a scientist, but without art, you can't put it together. You're stuck. You can't move anywhere. There's no progression in science. The world would still be flat.
Are you going to help me?
Yeah.
Really? Okay. Starting with stick figures?
My teacher told me we would have art class, so I was so excited for that. I was like gonna cry.
So
we have Lauren here.
So I think, I don't know if Lauren was going to come up here or not. No? Okay. But I think, as you can see in the power of the film, right? Art is kind of, you know, when
there she is. Hold on. Bring her out.
There she is.
Everybody,
Okay.
Lauren Greenfield.
Good. Great. So good to see you.
Yeah, sit down here. Sit.
Yeah, take a
a
seat.
seat.
Okay, that's fine.
Oh,
You can
yeah,
sit
go
down.
there.
Even
Go
better.
there.
Even
Take the podium, miss.
All right.
Well, I just want to say how honored I was to work with AJ Hassan again after getting the privilege of collaborating with her on Like a Girl and with LIFEWTR, this brand that's so committed to the arts. And should I?
Yeah, I mean, I thought, you know, I think it's interesting. Maybe I think people might be interested to know how we did this if you wanted to sort of talk a little bit about the experiment, how we went through this, because we really did use real people. I think it's interesting to hear from the perspective of the director and how we collaborated.
So first of all, this is a giant audience. I have a film in the festival here, and I think we have about a quarter of the audience. So I think that's an indication of where impact lies right now, is advertising and viral. But on behalf of the film festival and the filmmakers, please go to the theaters too and see the movies.
That's right.
With Like a Girl, we definitely learned that there was crazy impact in a piece going viral. And with this piece, it was really exciting because one of the things I love about AJ's work is the way she's inspired by statistics, and that was kind of the motivation for Like a Girl. And here we had this really powerful and also chilling statistic that AJ mentioned, that 84% of kindergartners test high for creativity, and by high school that plummets. And so we created a social experiment to really look at how creativity deteriorates, if it does, and why, and what the cost is, both for the individuals, non-artists, especially in addition to would-be artists, and also for society at large. So we, the other thing that was really inspiring about doing this is it was a real social experiment. We got to talk to more than 200 people in the process of looking for real people, and really found the discoveries that we were able to show with a smaller group of people in that initial survey. And what we found was what we showed on screen. So it's 100% real.
Yeah. So, I mean, really we saw the adults kind of struggle more because they had been so out of touch with their creativity. Yeah, stick figures, good old Mike.
I know.
But I think it's inspiring because I think what's interesting about the character Mike, who's the one who talked about his stick figures, is that was his young daughter in the film, and he wants art for her. You know, I think all of us, we want our kids to achieve the best as possible, and I think there is sort of a lack of understanding of how much art really can contribute to your creative problem-solving skills, to your innovative thinking, and so hopefully, you know, I think our goal is to try to bring more awareness around that issue and to help really bring more voices to the conversation around keeping art in our schools.
Yeah, and so really just a beautiful piece of work, and just again wanted to say thank you to Lauren for all
That's
the
right,
good
everybody.
work. So thank you.
The amazing Lauren Greenfield. Go. You have to see her film. It's at 2:45 today at the Alamo, Lamar. It's absolutely beautiful. It's called Generation Wealth. It's like a beautiful 25-year retrospective, but it's really powerful right now because it's an incredible reflection of where we are in society and kind of the excesses that we live with every day and sort of the consequences of that. But there are some laughs, so it's not that heavy.
So just looking at the clock right now, and I'm seeing some folks getting up as well, I think that pretty much wraps the session for today.
I think we wanted to take some questions, but we're running out of, we're a little bit out of time.
We'll stay up front probably afterwards.
Yeah.
To, you know, and Lauren as well, if you want to stay for, if anyone wants to.
Yeah, if you guys have any questions, I think we're going to hang out here right afterwards for a few minutes. If anyone wants to come up and talk to Lauren, myself, Todd, we'll be hanging out for a few minutes. So thank you guys so much.
Thanks so much for the time.